To continue our introduction and accessing data, we want to talk about factors. And depending on the kind of work that you do, this may be a really important topic. Factors have to do with categories and names of those categories. Specifically, a factor is an attribute of a vector that specifies the possible values and their order. It's going to be a lot easier to see if we just try it in R, and let me demonstrate some of the variations. Just open up the script and we can run through it together. What we're going to do here is create a bunch of artificial data, and then we're going to see how it works. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable x1 with the numbers 1 through 3. And by putting it in parentheses here, it'll both store it in the environment and it will display it in the console. So there we have 3 numbers, 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to create another variable y that's the numbers 1 through 9. So there that is. Now what I want to do is I want to combine these two, and I'm going to use the cbind or column bind data frame. So it's going to put them together and it's going to make them a data frame, and it's going to save them into a new object I'm creating called df for data frame 1. And we'll get to see the results of that. Let me zoom in on it a little bit. And there you can see we have 9 rows of data. We have one variable x1, that's from the one that I created, and then we have y. And then we have the 9 indexes or the row IDs that are down the side. Please note that the first one, x1, only had 3 values. And so what it did is it repeated it. So you see it happening 3 different times, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And what we want to find out is, now what kind of variable is x1 in this data frame? Well, it's an integer. And if we want to get the structure, it shows that it's still an integer if we're looking at this line right here. Okay, but we can change it to a factor by using as.factor. And it's going to react differently then. So I'm going to create a new one called x2 that again is just the numbers 1, 2, and 3. But now I'm telling R that those specifically represent factors. Then I'll create a new data frame using this x2 that I saved as a factor and the 1 through 9 that we had in y. Now, at this point, it looks the same. But if we come back to where we were and we get the type of, it's still an integer, that's fine. But if we get the structure of df2, now it tells us that x2, instead of being integer, is a factor with 3 levels. And it gives us the 3 levels in quotes, 1, 2, and 3, and then it lists the data. Now, if we want to take an existing variable and define it as a factor, we can do that too. Here I'll create yet another variable with 3 values in it, and then we'll bind it to y in a data frame. And then I'm going to use this one factor right here, and I'm going to tell it to reclassify this variable x3 as a factor and feed it into the same place, and that these are the levels of the factor. And because I put in parentheses, it'll show it to us in the console. And there we have it. Let's get the type. It's an integer, but the structure shows it again as a factor. So that's one where we could take an existing variable and turn it into a factor. If you want to do labels, we can do it this way. We'll do x4. Again, that's the 1 through 3. And we'll bind it to 9 to make a data frame. And here I'm going to take the existing variable, df4, and then the variable is x4. I'm going to tell it the labels, and then I'm going to give them text labels. I'm going to say that there are Mac OS, Windows, and Linux, 3 operating systems. And please note, I need to put those in the same order that I want them to line up to those numbers. So 1 will be Mac OS, 2 will be Windows, and 3 will be Linux. I run that through. We can pull it up here. And now you can see how it goes through, and it changes that factor to the text variables, even though I entered it numerically. If I want the type of to see what it is, it still calls it integer, even though it's showing me words. And the structure, this is an important one. Let's zoom in on that just for a second. The structure here at the bottom is it says it's a factor with 3 levels, and it starts giving me the labels, but then it shows us that those are actually numbers 1, 2, and 3 underneath. If you're used to working with a program like SPSS where you can have values and then you can have value labels on top of them, it's the same kind of concept here. Then I want to show you how we can switch the order of things. And this gets a little confusing, so try it a couple of times and see if you can follow the logic here. We'll create another variable x5. That's just the 1, 2, and 3. We'll bind it to y, and there's our data frame, just like we've had in the other examples. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that new variable x5 in the data frame 5, df5, and notice here I'm listing the levels, but I'm listing them in a different order. I'm changing the order that I put them in there. And then I'm lining up these labels. When I run that through, now you can see the labels here, maybe yes, no, it's showing us the 9 values. And then this is an interesting one because they're ordered. It puts them with the less than sign at each point to indicate which one comes first, which one comes later. We can take a look at the actual data frame that I made. I'll zoom in on that. And you can see, we know that the first one's a 1 because when I created this, it was 1, 2, 3. And so the maybe is a 1, you see, because it's the second thing here in each one. So 1 equals maybe. But by putting it in this order, it falls in the middle of this one. There may be situations in which you want to do that. I just want you to know that you have this flexibility in creating your factor labels in R. And finally, we can check the type of that. And it's still an integer because it's still coded numerically underneath, but we can get the structure and see how that works. And so factors give you the opportunity to assign labels to your variables and then use them as factors in various analyses. If you do experimental research, then this sort of thing becomes really important. And so this gives you an additional possibility for your analyses in R as you define your numerical variables as factors for use in your own analyses.